I stood at the edge of the cliff, the Pacific Ocean roaring beneath me. The wind whipped my face, salty and sharp, as I stared into the horizon. In that moment, the vastness of it all felt like an eerie metaphor for the emptiness that had been eating away at me for years. My name is Jack Monroe, and I'd spent the last 4 years running away from a past that kept clawing at me from every angle. I had my reasons, but none of them made the guilt any easier to swallow. I lived alone in a small beach house in Crescent City, California, where the ocean waves acted as a constant soundtrack to my thoughts. The ocean was my escape, the one place I could pretend I wasn't a part of a family built on secrets, lies, and ambition. But today, that peace was shattered by a single message. The phone buzzed in my hand. "Jack, I need you. Can you come home?" Just 6 words, but they landed like a hammer against the chest. It was from my mother. I hadn't seen her in over a year. The distance I'd put between myself and my family wasn't an accident, it was necessary. My father, once a towering figure in my life, had crumbled before me like an empire built on sand. My brother, well, he had chosen to stay in that world, the world of dirty money and blood-stained power. I read the message again. My mother was sick. Cancer. Stage 2. It didn't matter how long it had been, or how much I'd tried to sever the ties that bound me to my past. I couldn't ignore this. I had to go back. Not for my father, not for my brother Ethan, but for her. My mother, the only person who had never judged me for walking away from it all. I packed a bag quickly, not bothering with the usual thoughtfulness. Jeans, a hoodie, a toothbrush, the basics. I glanced around my small, minimalist space, my sanctuary from the chaos. The walls were lined with paintings of coastal sunsets, reminders of the life I'd chosen to live. I grabbed my keys and shut the door behind me, the sound of the lock clicking in place somehow more final than I'd ever expected. The drive back to San Francisco seemed like an eternity. Every mile felt like a weight being pressed on my chest, reminding me of the life I'd left behind. I turned the radio on in an attempt to drown out my thoughts, but the familiar country tunes only seemed to amplify the noise in my head. My father, Greg Monroe, 62 years old, tall, muscular, and charismatic in the way that only the truly dangerous can be. He had built his wealth from the ground up, owning and running one of the largest construction firms in the state. To him, success wasn't just a goal, it was his identity, his everything, and I was supposed to be the one to carry on the legacy. The chosen one. But that was before I discovered the truth. It was a late-night conversation that unraveled everything. I had just graduated college, fresh and eager to take my place in the company. My father had called me into his office, his usual grin plastered across his face. He handed me a file, seemingly a simple project proposal. I skimmed the pages, not thinking much of it until I stumbled upon a line buried deep in the fine print. Not report structural flaws. I stopped reading. My stomach twisted in knots. The company wasn't just cutting corners, it was putting lives at risk. I confronted him that night. At first, he brushed me off with a laugh. "Business is business, Jack. Not everything has to be perfect." But then I dug deeper, covering documents that detailed kickbacks to local officials, safety violations swept under the rug, and a project that had gone horribly wrong but was covered up. I left the company the next day, no big speech, no confrontation. I just walked out. My father, cold and distant, called it betrayal. But in reality, it was my way of surviving. I couldn't be a part of the monster he had become. The drive to the house felt different now. As I passed the familiar landmarks, the diner we used to go to, the park where I learned to ride a bike, it all seemed like a world that didn't belong to me anymore. But the house, that old Victorian mansion perched on the edge of the Bay Area, still loomed large. It was impossible to ignore. When I pulled into the driveway, my heart pounded like a drum. The house hadn't changed. It stood as it always had, an imposing monument to my father's ambition. The garage door was open, and there he was. Greg Monroe, wearing his usual work shirt and jeans, tinkering with the old truck I had always hated. Looked up when he heard my car, his expression unreadable. "Jack," he said, his voice gruff and low, as if it had been waiting to say those words for years. "How's Mom?" I asked, trying to keep the tightness in my throat from breaking through. "She's resting," he replied, with a gesture toward the front door. "Doctor says it's serious, but she's tough. You know your mother. I didn't respond. I could feel the distance between us growing by the second, but I had no time to dwell on it. Not now. I had to see her. I had to be there for her. Inside, the scent of disinfectant lingered in the air, mixing with the smell of the fresh flowers my mother always liked to keep in the vase. It was strange seeing her like this, frail, weak. She lay on the couch, her once vibrant face now pale, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. But her eyes, they still held the same warmth, the same fire that had always kept this family together. "Jack, my boy," she whispered, extending a fragile hand toward me. "You're here." I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine. It was cold, but the grip was firm, familiar. It reminded me of a time when we were a family, before all the lies and betrayals. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I should have come back sooner." "Don't apologize, sweetheart," she replied, smiling weakly. "You've always been my strong one. Just stay here, for now." Her words were a balm to a wound I hadn't realized was still open. But I knew this wasn't going to be easy. My father. My brother, Kyle, who had always been the one to side with him. The ones who chose the empire over family. The ones who never understood why I had walked away. The tension in the house was suffocating. That evening, Kyle came over with his wife, Michelle, and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. It had been a long time since we'd shared a meal together. Too long. Kyle was still the same charming, ambitious, always trying to prove himself. "Big bro," he said, clapping me on the back as he entered. "Good to see you. How's the big city life treating you?" I smiled thinly. Same old, same old. Work's busy. But my eyes kept drifting toward my father, who was sitting at the head of the dinner table, his face hard and unyielding. There was no warmth in his gaze, no recognition of the son he once cherished. Just a cold silence. Dinner was awkward. My mother tried to bring up old stories, tried to lighten the mood, but it was like we were all too far removed from those memories. Kyle was doing most of the talking, his voice filled with a kind of nervous energy. "You should have seen the new project we've got going, Jack," he said. "It's huge. Our firm's making some serious moves. We're getting bigger by the day." I nodded, trying to seem interested, but my mind kept wandering. And then my father spoke, his voice sharp and biting, cutting through the conversation like a blade. "Still too busy saving the world, Jack?" he asked, his eyes cold. The words hit me like a punch, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It had always been this way, his anger, his need for control. And now here we were, sharing a meal as strangers. It was clear he hadn't forgiven me. I excused myself from the table, retreating to the backyard. My father's gaze followed me out the door, and I could feel the weight of it pressing on me, suffocating me. There was no escaping the past, not now, not with her gone. As I stood there in the cool evening air, staring at the horizon, I realized something. I didn't just have to face my father. I had to face the truth about him, about everything. Whatever it took, I wasn't running anymore. The next morning, the weight of what had happened the night before hung over me like a storm cloud I couldn't shake off. The air was thick with tension, and the house seemed quieter than usual. My mother, who had always been the pulse of this family, was still resting in her room, and I could hear the faint sounds of her labored breathing from down the hall. I went into the kitchen to make myself some coffee. Space was familiar, but foreign at the same time, like a ghost of a life I used to know. The old coffee machine hummed to life, and as I waited for it to brew, I stared out the window, trying to center myself. The garden outside, once a place of laughter and light, now felt like a prison. I couldn't escape the feeling that this place, this family, was slowly suffocating me again. Kyle and Michelle had left early to get back to their life in the city, taking Lily with them. I hadn't said much to Kyle when he'd left. It was hard too, especially knowing how deep his loyalty ran to my father, even now. Kyle had always been the good son, the one who stayed and continued the family legacy, the one who didn't question the things I'd seen, the things I couldn't ignore. I set my mug down, trying to focus on the situation at hand. There was no time to waste. My mother's cancer was serious, stage 2, as she'd said, and she wasn't getting any better. I needed to be here for her, but I also knew I couldn't stay locked in this house forever. The past had a way of catching up to you, and the more time I spent here, the more I felt it creeping back into my life. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was odd. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked toward the door, heart thumping in my chest for reasons I couldn't explain. When I opened it, I found an older woman standing on the porch. Her clothes were simple dark slacks and a sweater, but her eyes, they were familiar, like a shadow from my past I had long buried. "Jack Monroe?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, that's me," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" "I'm Lila Green. I worked for your father, back when he first started the company. I need to talk to you. It's important." I looked at her, trying to piece together where I had seen her before. Lila. The name was familiar. My father had always surrounded himself with people like her, loyal employees who had been with him since the beginning. But what could she want from me now? "Come inside," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "What's this about?" She nodded gratefully and walked into the house, her eyes scanning the walls, taking in the family portraits and the remnants of a time I'd tried to forget. I led her into the living room where we both sat in the silence that hung heavy between us. "I've been trying to reach you, Jack," Lila began, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "There's something you need to know about your father, about the company. I didn't know who else to trust, but you, after everything you've been through, I thought you should hear it from me." My pulse quickened. There it was again, my father's world, his empire, the one I had walked away from. I could feel it creeping back into my life, pulling me deeper into its web. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though I could feel the tension in my chest. Lila leaned forward, her eyes darting around as if making sure no one else could hear her. "Your father. He's been hiding something, Jack. A secret. A dangerous one." My mind raced. "What kind of secret?" She hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "I don't know if you've heard of the old project, the one that nearly ruined everything. Before the company got big, your father made a deal with some people. Bad people. People who were into things they shouldn't have been. They got involved with your father's business. They helped him, yes, but they also got their hands dirty. Real dirty." My head was spinning. "What does this have to do with me?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Everything. You see, after your father signed the contract, things went wrong. The project failed. And when it did, it brought about something else. A cover-up. A life was lost, Jack. A man died on one of their job sites. His name was Darren, a foreman. They said it was an accident, but it wasn't. The company did what it always did, swept it under the rug." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "What happened to this man?" Lila's voice dropped to a whisper. "He was murdered, Jack. They staged it as an accident to protect your father. And that's not all. The people involved in that death, they didn't just vanish. They kept coming back. Still want something from your father, something he's been hiding for years." I felt the blood drain from my face. The rage and confusion bubbled up inside me, threatening to spill over. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because I can't keep quiet anymore," she replied. "I don't want to die with this secret, knowing what it could do to your family. To you." I didn't know what to say. This was the moment everything had changed. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but I still didn't understand what my father had been involved in, or how deep this all went. I stared at Lila, searching her face for any sign that she was lying. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. A game I wasn't prepared to play. "I don't know if I can do this," I said quietly. "I expose this. If I dig deeper, I could ruin everything, my family. My mother, she's already so sick." Lila took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "You have to do something, Jack. If you don't, the people your father's in debt to will come for him. And when they do, they won't stop with him. I'll come after you too." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about survival. And for the first time, I realized the lengths my father had gone to protect his empire. And now, the same empire was threatening to destroy everything I cared about. "I need time," I said, standing up. My mind was racing. "I have to think this through." Lila nodded slowly, standing as well. "You don't have much time, Jack. Trust me. Don't wait too long." She left as quietly as she had arrived, and I stood there, alone in the house, the silence pressing in on me. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My father's empire wasn't just built on lies, it was built on blood. And if I didn't act now, I might be the next one to pay the price. The rest of that day blurred together in a haze of confusion and dread. My mind was spinning. Everything I had thought I knew about my father, about my family, was slipping through my fingers like sand. Lila's words echoed in my mind, each one laced with a sense of urgency I couldn't ignore. She was right about one thing. I didn't have much time. That night I tried to sleep, but the darkness was thick with the weight of what I had learned. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. The story Leela had shared about my father's deal with dangerous people, about Darren's death, haunted me. And now, knowing there was more to the picture, I couldn't sit idly by. I couldn't let my family be destroyed by the very secrets they had spent years trying to bury. But how deep did it go? Was my father really capable of murder? Or had he just gotten caught up in a web of greed and corruption that had spiraled out of control? I didn't have the answers, and the more I thought about it, the less I wanted to. It was easier to walk away and pretend it wasn't my problem. But I couldn't, not anymore. I needed to talk to Kyle. The next morning, I left the house early. The cold air bit at my skin as I walked down the driveway to my car, my breath fogging in the chilly morning air. I had to know where Kyle stood in all of this. I had to understand how far he was willing to go to protect our father. He had to know something. He had to... The drive to his apartment in San Francisco didn't take long, but it felt like hours. The closer I got, the more my stomach twisted into knots. Kyle had always been the one who stayed by my father's side, the one who chose to continue the family business, even when I walked away. I wasn't sure if he would even believe me, let alone help me, but I had to try, for the sake of our family, for the sake of the truth. I parked in front of his building and took a deep breath before heading inside. The apartment was quiet when I arrived, just the faint hum of a television from the living room. Kyle was sitting on the couch, his feet propped up on the coffee table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I walked in, his expression neutral. "Jack," he said, sitting up straighter. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I replied, my voice low and serious. "It's about Dad." Kyle's face stiffened at the mention of our father. "What about him?" "I know what happened, Kyle," I said, my words coming out in a rush. "I know about the cover-up, about Darren. I know what Dad's been hiding. And I need you to tell me everything." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he set his phone down slowly, eyes narrowing as he studied me. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to decide whether or not to trust me. "You're being paranoid, Jack," he finally said, his tone dismissive. "Dad has done some things I don't agree with, but—" "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "This isn't just some things. People died, Kyle, and Dad's been hiding it all." Kyle's eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. Was it guilt? Fear. But it was gone before I could analyze it. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice growing cold. "I don't know what kind of story Leela's been feeding you, but Dad's not some monster. He built this family, this business from nothing. You don't just throw that away because of a few mistakes." I took a step closer to him. "It's not just a few mistakes. It's murder, Kyle. It's corruption. You think this is all just going to blow over? You think you can keep covering it up forever?" His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might actually hit me. But then something in his eyes softened. He looked away, swallowing hard, as if fighting back something. "I know," he said quietly. "I know. It's not that simple, Jack. You don't understand what he's done for us. For me. You don't know what it's like to be in his shoes. You think it was easy for him? For any of us?" I didn't know what to say. I had been so focused on the wrongs my father had committed that I hadn't considered what it must have been like for Kyle. For someone who had stayed behind, someone who had always had his back. "I'm not saying Dad's a saint," Kyle continued, his voice shaky now. "But ... he did what he had to do. You don't get to where he is without making sacrifices. Sometimes those sacrifices are hard to swallow." I sat down next to him, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. "And what about Darren? About the people who got hurt?" Kyle looked down, his face clouded with regret. "I wasn't there, Jack. I don't know what happened that night. But I know one thing: Dad didn't want anyone to die. He didn't, but that doesn't mean he can't fix things. That doesn't mean he can't make it right." I stood up, the anger building again. "By keeping it hidden? By pretending it never happened? That's not fixing anything, Kyle. That's just more of the same." He didn't respond. Instead, he rubbed his face with both hands, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. "I don't want to lose you too," he finally said, his voice breaking. I don't want to lose the family. We've already lost so much. For a moment, we both sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing in on us. The past, the present, the future, everything felt tangled together in a mess of emotions I couldn't untangle. I can't keep quiet, Kyle, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I have to do something, for Mom, for Darren. For all the people Dad's hurt, I have to find the truth. Kyle looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and something else, something darker. He didn't say anything, but I saw it in his face. He knew the truth too, just wasn't ready to face it. I don't know what will happen after this, but I have to do it, Kyle, I said. I have to. And with that, I left. I didn't know what to expect when I left his apartment, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stop now. Truth was out there, and no matter how much it hurt, I had to follow it. For my family. For myself. For everyone who had been affected by the lies and the cover-ups. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized one thing. The truth wasn't just hidden, it was buried under layers of deception, corruption, and fear. And now, I was in way too deep to turn back. The next few days passed in a blur, each one dragging by with the weight of the decisions I had made, settling in deeper. His words lingered like a bitter aftertaste. He wanted to protect the family, to keep it whole, even if it meant sacrificing the truth. But that wasn't the world I lived in anymore. The truth mattered more than family loyalty. It's more than anything. I couldn't shake the feeling that every step I took was one closer to unraveling the twisted web my father had spent decades weaving. And the more I dug, the more I realized there was no going back. I spent the next day going through old files. My father's company, Monroe Construction, had always been meticulous with its records. But now, those records felt like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle I had to put together, each one revealing a new part of the story I didn't want to know. I was careful, too careful maybe. If anyone found out what I was doing, the consequences could be catastrophic. But the need to uncover the truth was stronger than my fear. One evening, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open in front of me, going over financial statements and internal emails. I had been searching for evidence that tied my father directly to the cover-up, to Darren's death. But I found something else instead, a pattern, one that made my blood run cold. There, hidden in plain sight, was a series of transactions, ones I had overlooked the first time. Small, seemingly insignificant amounts of money paid to a private company in Nevada, an innocuous name at first glance. But the more I dug, the more I found. The payments increased over the years, growing in size, and the recipient's names started to appear in other places I recognized. The name was Blackstone Security. I didn't need to be a genius to know what that meant. Blackstone wasn't a security firm, it was a name that had been connected to organized crime. And now, my father's company was linked to them. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I read through the files. It wasn't just dirty deals anymore. This was something far worse. My father had been involved in far deeper, darker dealings than I had ever imagined. And if he had been hiding this, who else was involved? How many people had been compromised? I closed the laptop with a heavy thud. I couldn't keep doing this alone. It was time to take it to the next level. The following day, I called David, the prosecutor friend I'd reached out to earlier. His voice was as calm as ever when he picked up, but I could hear the tension in his words. "Jack," he said, his voice low, "I've been going over the documents you sent me. There's something here, something big. But I need to know, what exactly are you looking for?" "I found something else," I said, my voice tight. "I think my father's been working with Blackstone Security. They're tied to organized crime, David. I don't know the extent of it. But there's a connection, and it's deeper than I realized." I could hear him exhale on the other end. "You need to be careful, Jack. This isn't just about corporate corruption anymore. This is criminal. And if you're right, your father's involved in something that could destroy him. And anyone who gets too close." I paused, my stomach sinking. I need to know what happened to Darren. I need to know everything about Blackstone. David's silence stretched out for a moment before he spoke again, his voice quieter now, more urgent. "I can't promise you anything, but I'll help you. Just ... be careful, okay?" I thanked him quickly and ended the call, my hands shaking. The gravity of what I had just gotten myself into was starting to weigh on me. The pieces were all there, but the truth felt like a knife sharp, dangerous, and cutting deeper with every revelation. I spent the rest of the day compiling everything I had found: documents, emails, financial reports. But even as I organized the information, something gnawed at the back of my mind. My father's empire wasn't just about wealth and power, it was about control. If Blackstone was involved, that meant my father was no longer in charge of everything. Someone else had their hands in the dirt, pulling strings from the shadows. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table, I received another unexpected visitor. This time, it wasn't Lila. It wasn't Kyle. It was someone I had been hoping would stay out of this mess: my mother. Looking frail but still strong, her silver hair was tied back neatly, but her face was thinner than I remembered, her eyes tired but determined. "Jack," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mom, you shouldn't be up. You need to rest." "I'm fine," she said, her voice sharper than I expected. "I've been resting long enough, Jack. Now I need to know what's going on. You've been distant lately. You've been searching for something, haven't you?" "Something about your father?" I froze, my thoughts scattering. I hadn't realized she knew what was happening. I hadn't realized how much she had noticed. "Mom," I started, but she cut me off. "I know, Jack. I know what you're doing, and I know why you're doing it. But you have to understand something." I took a step closer to her, my heart heavy with guilt. "What do you mean?" She sighed, sitting down slowly on the couch. "I know your father isn't perfect. I know he's done things that are unforgivable. But you need to remember something, Jack. He's still your father. He's still the man who provided for this family, the man who sacrificed so much for us. You don't know what it's like to carry that weight, to make those kinds of decisions." I swallowed hard, trying to keep the emotion from rising in my throat. "But what about Darren, Mom? What about the lies? Can't just ignore what's happened." She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. "I'm not ignoring it, Jack, but I'm also not blind. Your father did what he thought he had to do to protect us, and sometimes, sometimes people do things they regret. But if you push too hard, if you dig too deep, you might destroy everything, including yourself." I sat down beside her, my mind racing. Her words stung. But there was something deeper in them, a warning I couldn't ignore. My father was no longer the man I had once admired, but he was still her husband. And as much as she had seen, I realized there was still a part of her that wanted to believe in him, wanted to believe that everything could somehow be fixed. "I can't let this go, Mom," I said quietly, my voice steady but firm. "I have to find out the truth. For Darren, for everyone who's been hurt by this." She didn't say anything for a long while, just looked at me, her face lined with worry. "I know you're doing this for the right reasons," she finally said. "But I hope you understand the price you'll have to pay. Because once the truth is out, it can never be taken back." I stood up, my chest tightening. "I know. But I can't live with the lies anymore." As I watched my mother settle back into the couch, I realized that no matter what happened next, I had already crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The truth was coming, and nothing could stop it. The days after my conversation with my mother were like walking through a fog. Everything felt distant, detached. My father's face, his voice, his choices, they had all been part of a world I thought I understood. But now, as I sifted through the wreckage of his empire, I realized that nothing had ever been as it seemed. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching me. It wasn't paranoia. Not exactly. It was the sensation of being hunted, of every step I took being carefully monitored. I had already crossed a line by digging into my father's past, but now the stakes were higher, much higher. It wasn't just about corporate greed and corruption anymore. It was about life and death. The emails I had uncovered about Blackstone Security were just the tip of the iceberg. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. Blackstone wasn't just a shady security firm. They were tied to some of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country, and my father. He wasn't just a willing partner. He was an active player. I tried to focus on the case, on finding a way to stop this before it spiraled out of control. I had spoken to David again, and he promised to help me, but his words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "Be careful, Jack. There's more going on than you realize. If you dig too deep, you might not like what you find." The next morning, I decided to pay another visit to Lila. I needed to know more about what she had seen, what she knew about Blackstone's involvement. I called ahead and she agreed to meet me at a cafe in the city. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She looked more frail than I remembered, her face lined with exhaustion. But her eyes, those eyes were sharp, focused. "Jack," she said, as soon as I sat down. "I've been thinking about everything, about what I told you. I didn't waste any time. I need to know more about Blackstone. Found the payments, Lila. I know my father was involved with them, but I don't understand why. What's the connection? What do they want?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting nervously around the cafe. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually," she muttered, her voice low. "I didn't want to drag you into this, Jack. But it's too late now. Please, just tell me," I urged, my heart pounding. "You know what's at stake here? People are getting hurt, and if we don't act fast, it could be worse." Lila took a deep breath and set her mug down, leaning in close. "Your father didn't just work with Blackstone. He owed them, big time. A long time ago, he made a deal with them to get his company off the ground. But the deal came with a price one he couldn't pay with money alone, so he gave them something else. Something more valuable. What was it?" I asked, my voice tight with anticipation. "A favor," Lila said, her words weighted with regret. "A big one. Your father promised Blackstone that when the time came, he'd help them with something they wanted. And that time came, Jack. That's why Darren had to die. He got in the way of Blackstone's plans." My stomach turned. The pieces were starting to fall into place. My father had made a deal with criminals, and now, all these years later, it was coming back to haunt him, and to haunt me. But why would Blackstone be involved in a cover-up like that? I asked, the question burning in my throat. Why murder someone just to protect a deal? Lila's face darkened, because it wasn't just about protecting your father's business. Blackstone wanted control, Jack. They wanted to use your father's construction company as a front for their own operations. And Darren, he was an obstacle. He didn't know it at the time, but he was close to finding out too much. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing everything she'd just told me. The realization hit me like a wave. My father had made a dangerous pact, and now it was all falling apart. The company, the lies, the cover-ups, it was all tied to Blackstone and their criminal empire. If I didn't act soon, they'd come after me too. "I have to stop this," I said, more to myself than to her. "I have to expose the truth, no matter what it costs." Lila's expression softened, but there was fear in her eyes. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Jack. These people don't care about the truth. They care about power. And they won't stop until they have it all. They'll destroy anyone who gets in their way, including you." I could feel the weight of her warning settling in my chest, but I couldn't turn back now. I couldn't leave it like this. My family had already been torn apart by my father's choices. The truth had to come out, even if it meant losing everything else. "I don't care what it costs," I said, my voice hard with resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes." Lila stared at me for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and fear. "Then you need to be ready, Jack. Once you expose this, there's no going back. Your father's empire will collapse, your whole family will be dragged into it, and if Blackstone gets wind of it, they won't stop until you're gone." I nodded, knowing she was right. The truth was a double-edged sword, and once it was out, there would be no putting it back. But I had to do it, for Darren, for my mother, for everyone who had been hurt by the lies. "I'm ready," I said, feeling a cold determination set in. Lila stood up, gathering her things. "I hope you are, Jack, because this is bigger than you think." As I watched her leave, I felt a pang of doubt, but it was overshadowed by something else, something darker. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how far my father was willing to go to protect his empire. And the more I knew, the less I could afford to turn back. I had to take the next step. I had to go after Blackstone, after the people who had been pulling the strings. But I knew I wasn't ready. I needed help. Help. Someone who could fight against the power and corruption that had taken over my life. And there was only one person I knew I could trust: David. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, praying that I hadn't waited too long. The phone rang twice before David picked up. His voice sounded tense, even through the static of the line. "Jack," he said, a trace of worry in his tone. What's going on? I need your help, I said, the words coming out more urgently than I expected. I know what happened to Darren. No. I know what my father's been hiding. I'm not just dealing with corporate corruption, David. This is something bigger. My father owes Blackstone Security, and it's not just business deals. It's criminal. It's been tied to them for years. There was a long pause on the other end. David was digesting the weight of my words, and I could almost feel the wheels turning in his mind. You're serious, aren't you? Said his voice, now grave. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. I've already dug too deep. Lalashi confirmed everything. My father's made deals with criminals, David, and people have died because of it. If I don't expose this soon, I'm afraid what might happen next. David let out a heavy sigh. You're in a dangerous game, Jack. This isn't something you can just brush under the rug. I'm going to need everything you have. Documents, files, anything that ties your father to this. And I need to know exactly what Blackstone is involved in. I've got everything, I said, a sense of urgency rising in my chest. But I can't do this alone. I need your help to get this to the right people. We need to move fast before Blackstone gets wind of what's happening. They'll come after me next. I know it. I'll do what I can, he said, his voice tight with resolve. But I need to warn you, Jack, once this gets out, there's no turning back. Your father's company, the people involved, they'll fight to keep everything in place. And you'll be right in the crosshairs. I know, I said, my voice steely. But I can't sit on this anymore. I can't let my father's legacy be a lie. I can't let him destroy everyone around him just to keep his empire intact. David paused, then let out a resigned breath. All right, Jack, send me everything. I'll get the ball rolling. But you need to be prepared. This won't be easy. There are powerful people involved, people who won't hesitate to protect their interests, even if it means going through you. I understand, I said, my resolve firm. Thank you, David. I knew I could count on you. I'll contact you soon, he said before hanging up. The weight of the conversation settled on my shoulders as I stared at my phone. I had just crossed the point of no return. There was no going back now. The truth was coming, whether I was ready or not. I spent the next few hours compiling the files, the documents, everything I had uncovered about Blackstone and my father's shady dealings. My hands shook as I sent the information to David, encrypting the files to ensure they wouldn't be intercepted. The moment I hit send, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because the truth was finally out there. Dread because I knew the storm that was about to hit. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, his cold, calculating gaze. I saw Darren, the man who had died to protect a lie. And I saw my mother, still fragile, still holding on to a love for a man who had never truly been what she thought. When I woke up, I checked my phone. There was a message from David. We've got a hit. The FBI's launching an investigation into Blackstone and Monroe construction. The information you sent has been confirmed. They'll be taking action. My heart pounded in my chest. The truth was out. The investigation was underway. But there was something else in David's message, something that made my blood run cold. Be ready. There's still a lot we don't know. And now they know we're coming. I knew then that this was far from over. Blackstone, my father, the people who had made sure his empire stood it, was all crashing down. But it wasn't just the company that was in danger. It was my life too. The things I had uncovered would change everything, and no one involved would go down quietly. I didn't have long to think about it. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously, my mind already racing with possibilities. Jack Monroe? The voice on the other end was low, gravelly. We know what you're doing. We don't take kindly to people poking around in our business. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Who is this? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. You've stirred the pot, Jack, the voice continued, a cold laugh creeping in. And you've got a choice. You can stop now, and we'll forget about this little mess. Or you can keep going, and we'll make sure your family's life gets a lot harder. You've got until tomorrow to think it over. The call ended abruptly, leaving a bitter silence in its wake. I stood there, the weight of the threat hanging in the air. They knew. They were watching. And they weren't going to stop until they had me silenced. I didn't need to think long. bong, I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. The next morning, I found myself standing outside my father's old office, staring at the tall glass building that had once been the headquarters of Monroe Construction. It was a tomb, a monument to the lies that had kept it standing. The doors were locked, but I knew what I had to do. I had to find the answers, and I had to expose everything. The air was thick with tension as I entered the building. Inside, the walls were bare, stripped of all the wealth and power that had once defined it. It felt like a ghost town. My footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, each one reminding me of how far I had come, how much I had lost. I reached my father's office, the door still bearing his name, but it no longer held the same weight. Inside, the desk was cluttered with old papers, reminders of a life built on lies. I rifled through the drawers, pulling out everything that could help me. That's when I found the last piece of the puzzle, a file that had been hidden at the bottom of the desk drawer. I opened it slowly and my heart sank. It was a letter, a final note from my father. In it, he detailed everything to deal with Blackstone, the people he had betrayed, and the sacrifices he had made to protect his empire. The letter ended with a single line, "I'm sorry, Jack, but there's no turning back now." It was his confession. His final admission that everything had been built on lies, and now I had the proof to bring it all down. I left the building with the file in hand, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready. The truth was finally within reach, and it wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about redemption. For Darren, for my family, for me. I had exposed the truth. And now, there was no going back.